You didn't just watch a routine royal update. You watched the most carefully controlled institution in the world reach its absolute breaking point. This wasn't just another headline about a family rift. It was the moment the mask slipped and revealed a cold, clinical reality. A king and his heir standing side by side, finally activating a secret protocol designed to protect the crown by erasing a son. Prince William has built a financial vault so secure that even the Duke of Sussex's last-ditch legal pleas couldn't find a crack. This isn't just about money. This is about power, legacy, and what happens when the one person who tried to humanize the crown nearly causes its destruction. Tonight, I am going to walk you through the leaks, the backdoor confrontations, and the absolute finality of the Windsor Cutoff. It wasn't just the debt. It was the sheer audacity of the demand. A senior palace aide described the moment King Charles received a formal letter from his estranged son, Prince Harry. In it, the Duke of Sussex acknowledged an urgent financial transition and requested an immediate sum of $100 million, citing pressing logistical burdens related to his reintegration. But William had been waiting. Since mid-year, the Prince of Wales had been drafting a counterstrike, known internally as the St. James Protocol. This wasn't a family discussion. It was institutional surgery. While King Charles reportedly ruminated on his role as a father, William acted as the future sovereign. He moved to block every remaining financial tether Harry had to the British crown, from minor legacy funds to the preferred lender status that allowed the Sussexes to sustain their California lifestyle. The forensic audit ordered by the king was the final blow. It unearthed $150 million in liabilities, a financial noose that Harry had quietly tightened around his own neck. As one palace aide noted, Harry didn't come back to atone. He came back to bargain. But William has built toll booths on the bridges Harry burned. The investigation into Prince Harry's financial affairs was not a mere formality. It was a strategic dismantling of his remaining influence. Sir Michael Stevens, the meticulous keeper of the privy purse, led a team that worked in the shadows to trace every pound associated with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. What they discovered was far more damaging than anyone had anticipated. The forensic audit unearthed a staggering $150 million in liabilities, a figure that stripped away any illusion of financial independence. This audit revealed a pattern of misdirection and desperation. The centerpiece of their American dream, the Montecito estate, had transformed into a gilded financial noose. With an $11 million mortgage remaining and interest rates ballooning, the property was technically unsellable without triggering immediate full repayment clauses. Behind the gates, the lifestyle of the Sussexes was being propped up by borrowed prestige and high-interest loans that were now coming due. Prince William's reaction to these findings was a mixture of disbelief and absolute resolve. He viewed the situation not as a family crisis, but as a fiscal contagion that threatened the institutional standing of the monarchy. William insisted on total financial severance, drafting legal opinions to terminate all contingency protocols that once supported his brother. He reportedly told senior advisors that every act of compassion from the palace had been monetized, and he refused to authorize a single pound to subsidize a lifestyle built on grievance. As the Prince of Wales consolidated his institutional command, even Queen Camilla's pleas for family unity were ignored. Charles's resolve had crystallized into a doctrine. The monarchy must not reward disloyalty with a rescue. The gates of Buckingham Palace weren't just being locked, they were being bricked shut by the weight of the audit's revelations. Harry was no longer just a wayward royal. He was a sinking enterprise, and the crown was officially cutting the line. By the time the details of the forensics audit were finalized, the strategy within the palace walls had shifted from caution to containment. The royal family did not issue a loud proclamation or a dramatic press release. Instead, they enacted what insiders call the Windsor Cutoff. This was a quiet, methodical closing of the gates, designed to sever the Sussexes from every remaining institutional mechanism of the crown. The implementation of the St. James Protocol meant that any incoming communication from Prince Harry regarding money was automatically redirected to an external legal team. Personal phone numbers that Harry had used since his boyhood were quietly disabled, and his direct line to the king was replaced by a clinical, legal wall. Prince William made it clear that the privilege of asking for help had been lost the moment the request was framed as a transaction. Across the Atlantic, the reality of this severance began to hit the Montecito household with brutal force. International banking entities, having received discreet notices of non-liability from the palace, began to reassess Harry's creditworthiness overnight. His last name, once the ultimate collateral, was suddenly treated as a high-risk liability. Mortgage extensions were denied, and private security contractors, sensing the shift in the royal guarantee, began to demand immediate payment for months of overdue invoices. Observers in California noted a visible change in Meghan Markle during her rare public appearances. The polished media professional appeared uncharacteristically anxious and distracted, reportedly facing mounting pressure from creditors who were no longer willing to wait for a royal bailout that was never coming. The illusion of a rival royal court was dissolving, leaving only a man with a famous surname and a stack of bills he could no longer pay. The monarchy had not just stopped the funding, they had deleted the account entirely, leaving Harry to face the consequences of a life built on borrowed prestige. The atmosphere inside the Oak Room at St. James's Palace grew even colder as the discussion turned to the potential for any future reconciliation. Princess Anne, often referred to as the most operationally blunt member of the family, provided the meeting with its final, icy clarity. She argued that Harry was not requesting aid, but was setting terms, which amounted to an infiltration rather than a return. She looked at the staggering security expenses in the audit and pointed out that the monarchy is a ship of state. If one man insists on drilling holes into its hull, you do not hand him the tools to finish the job. While Prince William remained the primary architect of the financial severance, King Charles found himself torn between the duty of a sovereign and the instincts of a father. However, Harry's transactional approach, treating his return as a corporate negotiation rather than a family atonement, triggered something deep within the king. Charles reportedly told his advisors that his son spoke like a contractor, not a son. The realization that every act of royal grace had been turned into a product for media consumption forced the king to align with William's hardline stance. The only senior royal to offer a softer view was Queen Camilla, who expressed concern for the future of Harry's children. She whispered to Charles that the grandchildren should not carry the weight of this exile, but her pleas were met with silence. Palace aides suspected that her motives were not purely maternal, but rather a strategic attempt to keep Harry as a counterweight to William's rapidly expanding influence. Despite these internal flickers of dissent, the consensus remained absolute. The monarchy would no longer fund disloyalty under the guise of family ties. The finality of this decision meant that the royal gates were not just locked, but effectively vanished for the Duke of Sussex. The protocol ensured that even if Harry attempted a quiet, humble return, the institutional machinery would prevent it unless he came with nothing left to bargain. The king's message was unwavering. Service to the monarchy is a calling, not a commodity to be purchased or leased. The news of the rejected $100 million request did not break on social media or in a tabloid, but in the respected pages of the Times of London. The headline confirmed what had only been whispered. Prince Harry had formally requested financial support for his return to royal duties, and the request was firmly rejected. Within hours, the story ignited a global firestorm, as the phrase that sealed the public's perception began to circulate. He didn't ask to come home. He asked to be paid to come back. The numbers painted a devastating picture of a life of illusion, propped up by borrowed prestige. Financial analysts began publishing breakdowns of the Duke's insolvency, revealing net streaming losses and millions in advance repayments still owed for unfulfilled projects. The audit showed that the high-end lifestyle, the jewelry leases, the designer clothing, and the private jet deposits was no longer sustainable with a streaming income that had effectively dried up. Public opinion shifted with dramatic finality. Polls conducted in the wake of the leak showed that a vast majority of the British public agreed with the palace's decision, viewing the Duke as a self-made liability rather than a victim. Even those who had once served in his charitable programs expressed a sense of betrayal, noting that while he left the monarchy to find freedom, he now seemed to be charging admission to return. In California, the silence was more telling than any statement. Meghan Markle reportedly fired her longtime PR consultants and began seeking crisis managers previously linked to Hollywood scandal control. But the optics were irreversible. She had gone from a global icon to a symbol of financial desperation, facing the mundane terror of American litigation as unpaid contractors and credit card companies began filing lawsuits. The monarchy had not just closed the gates, they had allowed the truth to finally dismantle the narrative. The financial investigation into Prince Harry's American life revealed a sophisticated web of entities that the palace viewed as a calculated attempt to hide the true scale of his desperation. Sir Michael Stevens's team discovered that the request for $100 million was intended to be wired into 3 obscure, unrelated financial entities, none of which were under the Duke's actual name. This suggested a pattern of misdirection, or what palace insiders described as a deliberate effort to settle commercial defaults without personal accountability. As the audit deepened, it became clear that Harry had been operating with a head-of-state lifestyle on a dwindling stream of influencer income. Since 2020, the Duke had pursued over 15 separate lawsuits, spanning privacy battles and security challenges, which had burned through $22 million in legal expenses alone. Many of these legal campaigns were allegedly funded through unsecured credit, based on the assumption that the Crown would eventually intervene. Prince William's strategy was to expose this illusion permanently. By the 6th of January, the Prince of Wales ensured that discreet letters were sent to major international banking entities, declaring a formal notice of non-liability. The Crown was no longer a guarantor for the Duke of Sussex. This clinical move shattered Harry's creditworthiness overnight, turning his famous surname from a golden key into a red flag for lenders. Back in Montecito, the silence of the monarchy was more terrifying than any public rebuke. Harry reportedly spent hours motionless on his terrace as he realized the royal back channels he had relied on since boyhood were now dead. The palace was no longer his home or his safety net. It had become an impenetrable fortress. For the first time, he faced the reality that the institution he had attacked was now the only thing that could have saved him, and they had chosen to let him fall. The Windsor Cutoff reached its final phase when King Charles signed the 3-clause blueprint for total severance. This was not a document born of anger, but of a cold, institutional necessity to protect the future of the Crown. The first clause effectively transformed Prince Harry from a protected royal into a private individual with no access to any sovereign mechanisms. This included the immediate termination of all housing and security reimbursements and the blocking of access to all shared trusts, including those maintained since the passing of Princess Diana. Prince William was adamant that the monarchy would not subsidize a lifestyle built on grievance. He made it clear that they were not just closing a bank account, but were deleting the entry entirely from the royal ledger. This institutional surgery extended to the highest levels of international finance. Banks were formally notified that the Crown provided no financial guarantees for the Duke of Sussex, a move that shattered the illusion of royal collateral that Harry had used to secure his American life. The finality of the protocol ensured that the personal appeals Harry had relied on for years were now redirected to a wall of external solicitors. Every email or message regarding money was met with a standardized legal refusal, ending the privilege of personal negotiation. The king's message to the household was unwavering. Service to the monarchy is a calling that must be walked toward with humility, not invoiced as a commodity. Inside the palace, this decision is viewed as the end of royal amnesty. A permanent precedent has been set, ensuring that no member of the family can trade their return for funding or use emotional leverage to bypass fiscal policy. For the Duke of Sussex, the door was not just locked, it had been bricked shut. He had lost not only his status and his funding, but the very luxury of being forgiven by the institution he once called home. As the reality of the street, James Protocol settled over California. The once bustling Archwell headquarters began to resemble a ghost ship. The financial audit had exposed nearly $1 million in unpaid salaries and debts to private contractors, leading to a mass exodus of staff. Armed security teams, who had protected the family with military-grade precision for years, were now walking away after months of missing invoices. The Sussexes were left with a skeleton crew, facing the mundane terror of litigation as creditors began to encircle the Montecito estate. Prince Harry, sensing the total collapse of his American enterprise, made one final, desperate move. He bypassed the official legal walls and sent a private message through a back-channel palace aide he had trusted since his youth. The message was stripped of the corporate language and the demands for a $100 million bailout. It was a simple, raw plea for a clean start and a return to the safety of the Windsor fold for the sake of his family. The message was forwarded to Prince William, who was in a late-night briefing at Clarence House. William reportedly looked at the screen in silence before handing the phone back without a word. To the Prince of Wales, the danger was no longer the cameras or the interviews. It was the silence between the scandals, where the next grievance was being written. He declined to respond, reinforcing the clinical boundaries of the Windsor Cutoff. By the next morning, the Palace Communications Office released an official note from King Charles. While it never named his son, the meaning was unmistakable to those who understood the language of power. The king stated that service to the monarchy is not a commodity to be purchased or leased. It is a calling that must be walked toward with humility, not invoiced as a condition for return. The last bridge had not just been burned, it had been dismantled by the institution's commitment to its own survival. The silence following the publication of the financial scandal was the loudest message Buckingham Palace had ever sent. Inside the institution, the decision was viewed as the permanent end of royal amnesty. A new doctrine had emerged, one that declared no royal may ever again trade their return for funding or use personal failure as an institutional obligation. This was the night the monarchy finally admitted it could bleed, and in doing so, it found the strength to cut away the parts that threatened the whole. Prince William's influence had now reached a zenith, effectively rewriting the monarchy's script for the 21st century. He had demonstrated that the crown manages perception and power, not just feelings. By holding the line against his brother's demands, William signaled that the future of the monarchy would be defined by clinical service rather than a polished fairy tale. The ancient institution had adapted to its own vulnerability by choosing survival over sentiment. While the king was seen in public moving with a quiet endurance, his resolve remained absolute. He had personally witnessed the moment the mask slipped, and he realized that the institution he led was more than just a family. It was a test case for survival in a world that watched its every move in real time. The royal family had closed the gates on the Sussexes, but they had opened a new chapter of transparency for the public, admitting that the crown is not a harmless myth, but a system that must be protected at all costs. As the winter of 2026 settled over London, the divide between the two brothers became a permanent border. The monarchy had evolved from a family business into a modernized ship of state, leaving Prince Harry as a man with a famous name, but no place within the walls. The lesson for the millions who watched from afar was clear. Even behind palace walls, every choice has a cost, and for the Duke of Sussex, the price of his independence had finally become more than he could afford to pay. As the echoes of the financial scandal fade, what remains is the cold, hard reality of a royal family that has fundamentally changed. The Windsor Cutoff was not just a response to a single request for money. It was the final act of a long gestating strategy to protect the future of the monarchy from internal contagion. King Charles and Prince William have demonstrated that the crown is no longer a safety net for those who choose the path of grievance over the path of duty. The gates of Buckingham Palace have been bricked shut, not with anger, but with the clinical precision of an institution that has chosen survival over sentiment. For Prince Harry, the consequences of this severance are now absolute. He finds himself in a position that no royal has occupied in modern history. A prince of the blood, stripped of his protection, his funding, and his access, left to navigate the mundane terrors of litigation and debt in a country that no longer sees him as a symbol of prestige. The illusion of a rival royal court in California has dissolved, leaving only the sound of unpaid invoices and the silence of a family that has officially stopped listening. He didn't just lose his status, he lost the luxury of being forgiven by the only institution that could have truly anchored him. The lesson for the world watching this drama unfold is a stark one. In the game of power and legacy, independence has a price that cannot always be paid in currency. The monarchy has survived for 1,000 years because it knows when to cut away the parts that threaten the whole, even when those parts share the same blood. As the Prince of Wales steps further into the light of his future reign, he does so with a clear doctrine. The crown is a calling, not a commodity. And for those who treat it as a transaction, the cost is the total loss of the only world they ever truly belonged to. This is the end of the fairy tale. The king has spoken, the heir has acted, and the duke is left with the weight of a famous name that now carries the heavy burden of liability. The monarchy has endured, the borders have been drawn, and for the Sussexes, the journey back to the gates has reached its permanent, silent end.